I know the flight crew on this flight. You are not the captain, so get out of here before I call security to drag you out.
Mom, step away from the aircraft. The woman's voice sliced through the quiet terminal like cold steel. Gate C was still half asleep under the pale yellow airport lights. Suitcase wheels rolled across polished tile. Coffee machines hissed somewhere in the distance. Boarding announcements echoed through the ceiling speakers. And in the middle of all that ordinary noise, a black female captain had just been stopped from boarding her own airplane. Monica Hayes stopped walking. Not fast, not slow, just stopped. Her Navy captain's jacket sat perfectly across her shoulders. Her badge reflected the harsh white terminal lights. A small black carry-on rested beside her leg. Everything about Monica looked controlled, precise, professional. The flight attendant blocking the jet bridge crossed her arms tighter. Susan Whitmore, 58 years old, almost 20 years with Skylink Airways. Susan looked Monica up and down the same way people inspect someone they already decided does not belong. "I'll ask you again," Susan said. "Where exactly do you think you're going?" Monica lifted her eyes from the tablet in her hand. "I'm the captain assigned to Flight 728, she replied calmly. "Monica Hayes." Susan laughed, not a warm laugh, the kind meant to embarrass someone in public. "Honey." Susan tilted her head slightly. "I've worked this route for almost 20 years. I know every crew member on this flight." Her eyes settled on Monica's face for one extra second. "And you are not the captain." A quiet tension spread across Gate C-14. The young gate agent behind the counter looked up from his monitor. A businessman in a Navy suit turned his head. A mother bouncing a sleepy toddler froze mid-motion. Monica did not change expression. She had seen that look before, in boardrooms, in military briefing rooms, during FAA inspections. The look people give when they decide you do not belong before you even speak. "I am the assigned captain for this aircraft," Monica repeated. Her voice stayed level. "If you need verification, I can show you my credentials." Susan did not look at the badge. She looked at Monica, then stepped closer. "You know the funny thing?" Susan said quietly. "People these days think putting on a uniform makes everyone believe them." The gate agent, Tyler, swallowed hard. He had only been working there for 3 weeks. But even Tyler could feel something deeply wrong unfolding in front of him. Monica reached toward her chest for her captain's badge. The movement was slow, deliberate. The metal insignia caught the overhead lights. And then Susan grabbed it, hard enough to rip the clip loose from Monica's jacket. The badge hit the floor with a sharp metallic crack. Nobody moved. An older couple near the boarding lane stared in disbelief. The businessman lowered his phone from his ear, and Monica stood completely still. Susan held the badge in her hand like it was fake. "People like you," she said, "will wear anything to get into places you don't belong." The air changed. Tyler felt his stomach tighten. He looked at Monica, waiting for her to explode, waiting for her to yell, waiting for the whole thing to fall apart. But Monica only looked directly at Susan. Her eyes did not flare, her voice did not rise. It was the face of someone who had spent years mastering herself while other people were allowed to lose control. "Give me my badge back," she said quietly. Susan laughed again, louder this time. "No," she snapped. "I'm calling security." Then she turned toward the gate intercom, pressed the button. Static crackled through the speaker system. "Attention, please. We are currently handling a security situation at Gate C-14. Passengers, please remain clear of the boarding area." The word security moved through the terminal like an electric shock. Heads turned immediately. Phones came out. A teenager near the windows pulled out his earbuds. An elderly veteran stood from his chair. A woman on a business call slowly lowered her laptop. And every single one of them looked at Monica Hayes, a black woman in a captain's uniform, being labeled a threat. Monica heard footsteps approaching fast behind her. Jordan Brooks appeared from the jet bridge hallway. Tall, tired, pilot jacket half-zipped. He stopped dead the second he saw the scene. Jordan frowned. "What the hell is going on?" Susan pointed directly at Monica. "This woman is trying to access the cockpit." Jordan blinked once, looked at Monica, then at the badge in Susan's hand. The color drained from his face. "That's Captain Hayes," he said immediately. "She's the assigned captain on this flight." Susan crossed her arms tighter. "Jordan, don't be naive.
What are you talking about?
Jordan stepped forward. I've flown with her 3 times. People like you always protect each other, Susan muttered. The sentence landed hard. Jordan went silent. Tyler went silent. Even the older couple near boarding looked stunned. Near the window, a teenager lifted his phone higher and started recording openly now. Monica still did not move, but something changed behind her eyes. Not anger, decision. She bent down slowly and picked the badge up from Susan's hand. This time Susan let go. Monica clipped it carefully back onto her jacket. Then she opened her wallet, pulled out a second credential, white card, FAA seal, bold black lettering across the center, Director of Flight Safety. Jordan saw it first. His breath caught. Tyler looked over his shoulder. His face turned pale, and Susan, for the first time since this started, said absolutely nothing. Because the woman she had just humiliated in front of an entire gate full of passengers was not just the captain of this aircraft. She was the person with the authority to freeze the airline's entire fleet. Susan Whitmore stared at the credential in Monica's hand like her brain refused to process what her eyes were seeing. The terminal noise seemed farther away now, muted, distorted. A boarding announcement echoed somewhere down the concourse. A child cried near a coffee stand. The smell of burned espresso drifted through the air. But inside gate C-14, nobody moved. Jordan Brooks looked between the two women carefully. He knew Monica well enough to recognize the danger in her silence. Not emotional danger, professional danger. Monica Hayes was not the kind of person who exploded. She documented. And people like Susan rarely understood the difference until it was too late. Susan finally cleared her throat. Well, she said stiffly, nobody informed me. Monica slid the credential slowly back into her wallet. You didn't ask, she replied. That hit harder than yelling would have. Tyler looked down at his keyboard fast, pretending to work because suddenly he felt embarrassed to even be standing there. The older couple near boarding exchanged another glance. The husband leaned closer to his wife and whispered, Jesus Christ. Susan's jaw tightened. People were still filming. She noticed that now. 3 phones, then 5, then more. A young woman in yoga pants near the charging station lowered her voice and whispered to her friend, This is insane. Another passenger muttered. She literally ripped the badge off her chest. Susan heard all of it. The problem with public humiliation was that once the room turned against you, every whisper sounded louder. Susan straightened her uniform jacket, trying to regain control. Well, she said sharply, if there was confusion, that's unfortunate. But I was protecting the aircraft. That's my responsibility. Monica looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once. You're correct, she said quietly. Protecting the aircraft is your responsibility. Susan relaxed a fraction. Then Monica continued. So is knowing who has legal command authority over it. Jordan exhaled slowly under his breath. Tyler physically stopped typing. Susan's face hardened again. I made a judgment call. No, Monica replied. You made an assumption. The words landed flat and heavy, because everyone standing there knew exactly what kind of assumption it had been. Susan opened her mouth, closed it again. The silence around gate C-14 had become unbearable now. Not loud, worse than loud, witnessing silence, the kind people remember years later. 2 airport security officers finally approached through the terminal crowd, both young, one white, one Hispanic. Their radios crackled softly as they walked. The taller officer stepped forward first. What's going on here? Susan immediately pointed toward Monica again. This woman was attempting to access the aircraft without proper verification. Jordan's head snapped around. You cannot be serious. The officer looked confused already. Monica calmly handed over her credentials. The officer examined the badge, then the FAA credential, then the name. His posture changed instantly. Yes, Mom, he said quickly, handing them back with both hands. Susan saw it happen, that tiny shift. Respect, immediate, automatic. The kind she herself had refused to give 30 seconds earlier. Monica clipped the badge carefully back onto her jacket. Then she looked directly at the officers. I'd like both your names for an incident report. The younger officer blinked. Incident report? Yes. Monica's voice stayed calm. A flight crew member physically removed my credentials, publicly identified me as a security threat over the gate intercom, and delayed boarding of a commercial aircraft. Susan's face lost color. Jordan folded his arms tightly across his chest, and suddenly the reality of what was happening started taking shape in the room. Not drama, documentation, not emotion, liability. The older businessman near boarding quietly lowered himself into a seat. His face had gone pale. He worked corporate law in Charlotte. 40 years in litigation, he recognized danger when he heard precise language. And Monica Hayes was speaking like someone already building a case. Susan forced out a dry laugh.
Oh, come on. We're really doing this?
Monica looked at her evenly. You already did this. Another silence. Tyler glanced toward the departure screen. Flight 728 now showed delayed. Passengers were beginning to crowd around the gate area asking questions. A man near Group 2 boarding muttered, "What the hell happened?" The woman beside him answered without taking her eyes off Monica. "She's the captain." The man frowned. Then why was security called? Nobody answered, because everybody already knew the answer. Susan rubbed both hands down the front of her skirt nervously now. The confidence was leaking out of her one piece at a time. "Look," she said, softer this time, "if there's been some misunderstanding." It wasn't a misunderstanding. Monica cut her off gently, and somehow that was worse. The officer holding the radio shifted awkwardly. "Mom," he said carefully to Monica, "would you like us to escort you somewhere private while this gets sorted out?" Jordan closed his eyes briefly, because even now,
Even after the credentials, even after confirmation.
the instinct was still to move her. Not Susan, her. Monica noticed it too. Of course she did. People like Monica always noticed. "That won't be necessary," she said. Then she looked directly at the officer. "I'm remaining with my aircraft." The officer nodded quickly. "Yes, Mom." Susan looked trapped now. For the first time all morning, she looked old. Not physically, morally. Like someone suddenly realizing the world they relied on no longer worked the way it used to. A phone camera moved closer. A teenager in a gray hoodie stepped forward carefully.
Excuse me, Captain?
Monica turned slightly. The teenager swallowed hard. "My mom's a pilot," he said quietly. "I just want to say, what happened to you wasn't right." The terminal went still again. Monica looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time since this started, something in her expression softened, just slightly. "What's your name?" she asked. "Ethan." "How old are you, Ethan?" 16. Monica nodded once. "Then remember this when you're older," she said calmly. "Authority without respect is just noise, and assumptions can damage people faster than facts ever can." Ethan nodded immediately, like he would remember that sentence for the rest of his life. Susan looked away, because the worst part was no longer the embarrassment. It was the realization that everyone watching had started measuring her against Monica and finding her small. Tyler's screen suddenly flashed incoming call. Operations. His stomach dropped. He answered quickly. "Gate C14, this is Tyler." The voice on the other end spoke fast. Tyler's eyes widened immediately, then widened more. He looked up slowly toward Monica. "Yes, sir," he said quietly into the headset.
She's here.
Jordan saw Tyler's face change and muttered under his breath, "Oh boy." Tyler swallowed, then covered the receiver with his hand. "Captain Hayes." The entire gate looked at him. Tyler's voice cracked slightly. "The Vice President of Operations is on the line for you." Susan's shoulders visibly dropped. Because people at Monica's level did not receive direct calls from airline executives before sunrise, unless they carried serious power. Monica took the phone calmly. Hayes speaking. The terminal was so quiet people could hear the faint voice through the receiver. Then Monica listened, expression unreadable. No anger, no victory, just focus. Finally she answered, "Yes, sir, pause, I understand." Another pause. Then one final sentence, "No, I don't want an apology right now." Her eyes lifted slowly towards Susan. "I want every record preserved exactly as it happened." Monica's words did not echo through the speaker, but they changed the room anyway. Every record preserved exactly as it happened. Susan heard it. So did Jordan. So did Tyler, who suddenly sat straighter behind the gate counter, as if the keyboard in front of him had become evidence. The Vice President of Operations kept talking on the line. His voice was low, but the tone carried enough weight to make Tyler stop breathing for a second. Monica listened without interrupting. That was one of the things people misunderstood about real authority. It did not rush. It did not need to fill silence. It listened, measured, and then moved. Yes, Monica said. The badge was physically removed. A pause. Yes, in front of passengers. Another pause. No, boarding has not resumed. Susan's face tightened at each answer. Her hands, which had been folded neatly in front of her uniform, began to rub together. Once, twice. Then she caught herself and stopped. The older man in the veteran's cap watched her closely. He had spent his life around people who pretended not to be afraid. He recognized the signs. The stiff jaw, the dry blink, the way a person suddenly becomes very aware of their own hands. Susan was afraid now. Not of Monica's anger, of Monica's accuracy. Jordan stepped closer to Monica, but not too close. He stood just behind her left shoulder, quiet, solid, present. He had seen captains lose control over much less. He had seen men throw clipboards, slam doors, bark orders until everyone around them shrank. Monica did none of that. She held the phone to her ear with one hand and opened her tablet with the other. Her thumb moved across the screen. Smooth, fast, precise. Incident log. Timestamp. Gate C14. Flight 728. Assigned aircraft. Crew present. Security response. Badge removal. Public threat announcement. Her fingers did not tremble, but inside something old and tired pressed against her ribs. Not fear, not humiliation. Something deeper. The exhaustion of having to be calm because everyone was waiting for a reason to call her difficult. Monica knew that feeling too well. She had carried it through flight school, through military cargo missions, through airline training rooms, where men with fewer hours questioned her judgment in front of younger crews, through interviews where people complimented her discipline and ignored her brilliance. She knew the price of one raised voice, so she did not raise it. She built the record instead. Across the gate, Susan turned toward the taller security officer. "This is getting completely blown out of proportion," she said under her breath. "I had a concern. That's all. I had a concern." Officer Ramirez, the younger one, shifted his weight. He looked at Susan, then at Monica, then at the passengers holding phones. "Mom," he said carefully, "you took her badge." Susan snapped her eyes toward him. "I was verifying it." Ramirez did not answer right away. He had been a security officer for 4 years, long enough to know the difference between verification and force, long enough to know when someone was rewriting a moment while the moment was still warm. "You didn't scan it," he said. "You pulled it off her uniform." Susan's mouth opened. Nothing came out. That was when the gate supervisor arrived. Her name was Patricia Caldwell, 52 years old, short gray hair, reading glasses hanging from a black cord around her neck. She walked fast, but not panicked, carrying a tablet in one hand and a paper coffee cup in the other. She looked annoyed before she looked informed. Then she saw Monica. The coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. "Captain Hayes." Those 2 words did more damage to Susan than any accusation could have. Recognition. Immediate. Public. Patricia's face changed from irritation to alarm in less than 1 second. Then she looked at Susan. "Susan," she said quietly, "what did you do?" The question was not loud. It did not need to be. Susan swallowed. "I was protecting the aircraft." Patricia looked at the badge on Monica's chest, then at the security officers, then at the passengers.
Did you touch her credential?
Susan's chin lifted. I had reason to question whether she was who she claimed to be. Patricia closed her eyes for half a second. It was the expression of a woman who had handled hundreds of airport problems and suddenly realized this was not a passenger complaint. This was a career-altering event, maybe more. Monica lowered the phone slightly. "Patricia," she said, "I need the crew manifest locked. I need surveillance footage preserved from gate C14. I need the intercom audio pulled. I need names of security personnel who responded. And I need Linda Whitmore removed from duty pending review." Susan's eyes flashed. "My name is Susan." Monica turned to her. "Yes," she said. "Susan Whitmore, senior flight attendant, employee identification pending confirmation." The correction was surgical, not petty, not emotional. Just proof that Monica was writing everything down exactly. Susan felt it then. The room had moved beyond her control. For nearly 20 years, she had lived inside the small authority of her uniform. She knew regular customers. She knew who tipped. She knew which gate agents backed down. She knew how to sound official enough that people stopped questioning her. But Monica was not questioning her. Monica was recording her. Patricia stepped closer to Monica. Captain, I apologize. We can get this cleared up and resume boarding. No, Monica said, one word, soft, final. Patricia stopped. Monica placed the phone back to her ear. Yes, I'm still here, she said. I'm requesting a crew integrity assessment before this aircraft boards another passenger. Jordan looked down. He had expected it. Still, hearing it out loud made the air shift. A crew integrity assessment meant delay. Interviews, statements, checks. It meant the airline had to determine whether the assigned crew could safely and professionally operate the flight. Passengers did not know the technical meaning, but they understood the effect. Something serious was happening. A man near the boarding lane groaned softly. I'm going to miss my connection. His wife touched his arm. Don't, she whispered. He looked at her. She nodded toward Monica. Just don't. The man looked back at the captain, at the straight posture, at the badge Susan had tried to take, at the stillness of a woman refusing to be rushed past her own dignity. He closed his mouth. Susan heard the exchange. Her eyes grew wet, not with remorse yet, but with frustration. She looked around for someone to rescue her, a friendly passenger, a co-worker, anyone. No one moved. Then a small voice came from the seating area. It was an older black woman in a beige coat, sitting with a canvas tote in her lap. Her name was Evelyn Price, 71, retired school principal. On her way to Chicago to see her first great-grandchild, she had watched from the beginning. Her hands had been folded tightly the entire time. Now she stood, slowly. Her knees hurt, her back hurt, but her voice was steady. I saw her take the badge, Evelyn said. The gate went silent again. Susan turned toward her sharply. Mom, you don't understand airline procedure. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. I understand bullying when I see it. No one breathed. Evelyn took one step forward. I spent 36 years in public schools, she said. I have seen people use rules to protect children, and I have seen people use rules to humiliate them.
Those are not the same thing.
Monica looked at Evelyn just for a second. Something passed between them, a recognition older than the moment. Susan's face hardened, but her voice came out smaller. I was doing my job. Evelyn shook her head. No, baby. You were deciding who deserved respect before you knew the facts. That sentence struck deeper than Susan wanted it to. Tyler lowered his eyes. Jordan looked away. Even Officer Ramirez swallowed hard. Because the truth had been spoken plainly now, not by a lawyer, not by an executive, not by a headline, by a grandmother with a canvas tote and tired knees. Monica ended the call. She lowered the phone. The terminal waited. Then she looked at Patricia. Operations has authorized preservation of all records, she said. No one deletes footage. No one edits reports. No one boards until the assessment is complete. Patricia nodded quickly, understood. Susan whispered, this is absurd. Monica turned to her. For the first time, there was something like sadness in her eyes. Not weakness, sadness. The kind that comes when someone has shown you exactly how little they were willing to see. No, Monica said. What's absurd is that I had to prove I belong at the door of my own aircraft. The words landed softly, but they cut through every excuse in the room. And for the first time that morning, Susan Whitmore looked at Monica Hayes and did not see a stranger trying to enter a cockpit. She saw the captain. She saw the authority. She saw the damage. And somewhere deep behind her eyes, fear began turning into understanding. The delay clock on the departure screen rolled past 40 minutes. Passengers were no longer whispering. Now they were watching, really watching. Not with curiosity anymore, with judgment. Gate C-14 had turned into something larger than an airline delay. People felt it in the air now. The tension had shape, weight, memory. Tyler could barely keep up with the calls flooding his headset. Operations, crew scheduling, corporate compliance, media relations. That was the moment his stomach dropped. He glanced toward Monica again. She stood near the boarding scanner with her tablet tucked against one arm, answering questions from Patricia in short, controlled sentences. Every answer exact, every detail clean, no exaggeration, no performance. That scared people more than anger ever could. Susan sat 3 rows away now, isolated near the windows. No passengers sat beside her anymore. Her hands rested stiffly in her lap, fingers interlocked so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. She kept looking toward the jet bridge, then toward the phones recording her, then toward Monica, and every time her eyes landed on Monica Hayes, The same thought hit harder. I picked the wrong person. Not because Monica was powerful, because Monica had been right. That part hurt more. Jordan leaned against the counter beside Tyler and lowered his voice. How bad is it? Tyler muted the headset. They froze the aircraft. Jordan stared at him. Fully? Tyler nodded once. No boarding, no pushback authorization, full review pending. Jordan exhaled slowly through his nose. A full freeze before sunrise was almost unheard of unless legal exposure was serious. Around them, passengers shifted in their seats. Coffee cups sat untouched. News notifications buzzed across phones. A toddler cried somewhere farther down the concourse. And still nobody left. Because human beings know when they are witnessing the moment before something breaks open. Patricia approached Monica carefully. Corporate wants to move this discussion to a private office. Monica looked up from her tablet. Why? Patricia hesitated. They're concerned about escalation. Monica's eyes moved briefly across the passengers, across the phones, across Susan, across the elderly woman named Evelyn still seated quietly near the windows. Escalation already happened, Monica said, publicly. Patricia rubbed her forehead. She looked exhausted already, and it was not even 7 in the morning. Monica, it was the first time she used her first name. Not captain, not director, just Monica, the human version. We can fix this internally. Monica's face remained calm. That phrase is why this keeps happening. Patricia went silent. Jordan looked away immediately because he knew she was right. Everyone in aviation knew it. Things got buried, handled quietly, reframed, redirected. A complaint became a misunderstanding. Bias became miscommunication. Humiliation became procedural confusion. And the people harmed by it learned to carry it alone. Susan suddenly stood from her seat. I want union representation. Her voice cracked slightly. Several heads turned. Officer Ramirez stepped closer automatically. Monica watched Susan carefully, not with hatred, with attention. Susan crossed her arms defensively. This has become hostile. Evelyn Price looked up from her chair. No, the older woman said quietly. It became honest. Susan's jaw tightened. You don't know me. Evelyn nodded slowly. You're right, I don't. Then she looked directly at Susan. But I know what fear looks like when it turns into cruelty. The words hit harder than anyone expected. Susan looked away first. Near the charging station, Ethan still held his phone in both hands. He had stopped recording 20 minutes ago, but he had not left. Neither had his father. A tall mechanic from Birmingham with rough hands and silver hair at the temples. He stepped closer now. Captain Hayes? Monica turned. The man cleared his throat awkwardly.
My son wants to be a pilot.
Ethan looked embarrassed immediately. Dad? No, his father said softly. She should know. He turned back toward Monica. He's been nervous about it. Says people don't really see guys like him in those jobs much. Monica looked at Ethan carefully. You still want it? She asked. Ethan nodded. Monica stepped closer. Then don't let broken people decide your ceiling. The boy swallowed hard. Jordan watched the exchange quietly. That was what separated Monica from most executives he had met. She understood that moment spread. One humiliation spreads. One act of dignity spreads too. That was the real danger of what happened this morning. Not the video. The example. Tyler's headset buzzed again. He answered quickly. Then sat up straight. His eyes widened. Yes, sir. She's here. Jordan looked over immediately. What now? Tyler lowered the headset slowly. The FAA regional office is requesting direct contact. Susan physically stopped breathing for a second. Even Patricia froze. Because once federal oversight entered the room, this was no longer an airline embarrassment. It became institutional. Patricia walked toward Monica again, voice lower now. The FAA wants a preliminary statement. Monica nodded once. Of course they do. Susan stepped forward suddenly. This is insane, she snapped. You're acting like I committed a crime. Nobody answered. That silence frightened her more than shouting would have. I asked questions, Susan continued. That's all I did. Jordan looked at her carefully. No, he said quietly. You decided the answer before you asked. Susan turned toward him sharply. You're taking her side? Jordan stared at her in disbelief. Side? His voice stayed low, controlled. She's the captain. Susan laughed bitterly. There it is. Jordan's face hardened. No, he replied. There it finally is. The words hung between them. Sharp, clean, unavoidable. Patricia looked physically uncomfortable now, like someone trapped between legal disaster and moral failure. Monica saw it. She also saw something else. Tyler avoiding eye contact because he felt guilty for not stepping in sooner. Officer Ramirez replaying the badge incident in his head. Passengers questioning how many times they had watched something unfair happen and said nothing. This was no longer about one woman at one gate. That was the truth sitting underneath everything. Monica took a slow breath. Then she walked toward Susan. The entire gate went still. Susan lifted her chin instinctively, trying to recover authority that no longer existed. Monica stopped 3 feet away, close enough for Susan to see the exhaustion beneath her composure. "You know what the worst part is?" Monica asked quietly. Susan said nothing. Monica glanced around the terminal. "At some point this morning, you stopped seeing a person." The sentence landed softly, but Susan flinched like she had been slapped. Monica continued. "You saw a threat before you saw a face. You saw suspicion before you saw credentials. And once that happens," she paused briefly, "people can justify almost anything." Susan's eyes grew wet instantly. Not because she agreed, because somewhere deep down she recognized the truth. Monica's voice stayed calm. "I don't think you woke up trying to destroy someone's dignity today." Susan looked down. "For the first time since sunrise, I think you stopped questioning your own assumptions a long time ago." The gate remained silent. Even the terminal noise seemed distant now. Monica stepped back slightly. "And when nobody challenges those assumptions," she said, "they grow." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. Jordan folded his arms tighter. Tyler stared at the floor. Because every person standing there knew Monica was no longer talking only about Susan Whitmore. She was talking about systems, habits, silence, power. The things that survive because ordinary people decide discomfort is easier than confrontation. Patricia's phone suddenly vibrated. She checked the screen. Her face changed immediately. "What is it?" Jordan asked. Patricia looked up slowly. "The video's online." A cold wave moved through the gate. Ethan lowered his eyes. A businessman near boarding whispered, "Oh no." Patricia refreshed the screen again. Her voice dropped. "It already has over 200,000 views." Susan sat down hard in the nearest chair, like her knees gave out all at once. And Monica Hayes finally understood something important. This morning was no longer contained inside Gate C-14. Now the whole country was walking into the terminal with them. Within 30 minutes, the video was everywhere. Phones buzzed across the terminal like insects. Passengers refreshed their screens over and over. News alerts appeared. Social feeds exploded. Somebody near Gate C-11 said the clip had already reached national aviation forums. Tyler looked pale, staring at his monitor. "They reposted it," he whispered. Jordan rubbed both hands over his face. "How bad?" Tyler turned the screen slightly. A frozen image filled the display. Susan grabbing Monica's badge. Monica standing still. The caption underneath read, "Black female captain stopped from boarding her own plane." Jordan closed his eyes. Jesus. Across the gate, Patricia's phone would not stop vibrating. Corporate legal, public relations, labor relations, FAA compliance. Every department that usually stayed hidden behind conference room doors was suddenly awake before sunrise. And all of them wanted answers. Susan sat alone near the windows, staring at the floor. Her shoulders had collapsed inward now. The sharp authority she wore earlier had drained away, leaving behind someone smaller, older, human, but not harmless. That was the complicated part. People in the terminal were beginning to split into camps. Some passengers looked furious at Susan. Others looked uncomfortable. A few defended her quietly. She was just being cautious. She didn't know. These days you have to be careful. Monica heard every version. She always did, because the language people used after causing harm often mattered more than the harm itself. Careful, concerned, procedure, words that sounded clean enough to hide ugly things inside them. Evelyn Price sat quietly near the charging station, hands folded over her cane now. She watched the younger passengers argue under their breath. Then she shook her head slowly. "People always rush to defend dignity after they help destroy it," she murmured. Ethan heard her. "So what are people supposed to do?" he asked quietly. Evelyn looked up at him, interrupted sooner. That answer stayed with him. Near the gate desk, Monica continued typing into her incident file. every movement controlled, every sentence factual. Jordan watched her carefully. You haven't stopped working for 1 second, he said softly. Monica kept her eyes on the screen. That's how you survive this industry. Jordan leaned against the counter beside her. No, he replied. That's how you survive people. For the first time all morning, Monica paused, just briefly, because he understood something most people never did. Pilots trained for emergencies, engine fires, hydraulic failures, cabin depressurization. But nobody trained black professionals for the exhaustion of constantly managing other people's assumptions. That part they learned alone. Patricia suddenly approached again, moving faster this time. We have a problem. Jordan almost laughed. We crossed that bridge an hour ago. Patricia ignored him. There's a reporter downstairs asking for confirmation. Tyler muttered, Already? Patricia nodded grimly. Local aviation blogger first. Now cable media picked it up. Susan lifted her head sharply from across the gate. You called the press? Nobody answered, because nobody had to. Phones had become press years ago. Monica closed the incident file on her tablet. I didn't contact media. Susan stood again, but you knew exactly what would happen. That finally pulled Monica's eyes toward her fully. The terminal noise faded again around them. You think I caused this? Monica asked quietly. Susan's voice cracked. You could handle this privately. Monica stared at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once. Yes, she said softly, I probably could have. Susan looked relieved for half a second. Then Monica continued. But private is where accountability usually goes to die. The words hit the gate harder than shouting. Jordan looked down immediately, because he had seen it too many times. Complaints buried, quiet settlements, mandatory training videos nobody watched. Then everybody moved on while the same behavior kept growing in silence. Susan's breathing grew uneven now. This is ruining my life. Monica's face remained still. No, she said. Your choices are doing that. Susan looked like she wanted to argue, but somewhere inside herself she already knew the difference. A middle-aged man in a Cardinals jacket stepped closer from the seating area. I watched the whole thing, he said carefully. And honestly, at first I thought maybe she really wasn't cruel. The gate fell quiet again. The man looked embarrassed immediately. Monica did not react. He swallowed hard.
I guess,
he continued slowly. I realize how fast people decide things when they think someone doesn't fit the picture in their head. Nobody mocked him. That was the strange thing about truth spoken honestly. It softened rooms. The man rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. My daughter's a surgeon, he said. People still ask her if she's the nurse. Evelyn nodded slowly from her seat. There it is. The man looked at Monica. I'm sorry. Monica studied him carefully. Unlike Susan, this man was not defending himself. He was examining himself. That mattered. Thank you, Monica replied quietly. And just like that, something shifted again inside the terminal. Not toward forgiveness, toward recognition. Patricia's phone rang once more. She answered immediately.
Yes, sir. Yes, she's here.
Her expression tightened instantly. Then she turned her toward Monica. The chief executive officer wants a direct update. Several passengers looked up at once. Even Susan blinked. Jordan let out a low whistle under his breath, because airline CEOs did not personally involve themselves in ordinary employee disputes. Not before breakfast. Patricia lowered her voice. He's asking whether you intend to formally escalate. Monica took a slow breath. The terminal waited. She already knew the answer, but saying it out loud would change everything. Jordan watched her carefully. He knew that look. Monica was thinking beyond herself now, beyond humiliation, beyond anger. She was thinking systemically. That was always the frightening thing about highly disciplined people. When they finally chose to act, they rarely acted emotionally. They acted structurally. Monica finally spoke. Yes, she said. Patricia's shoulders dropped slightly. Monica, this isn't about punishment.
Then what is it about?
Monica looked around the gate slowly. At Ethan. At Evelyn. At Tyler still replaying the moment in his head. At passengers suddenly questioning their own instincts. At Susan unraveling under the weight of public exposure. Then Monica answered. It's about interruption. The word hung in the air. Patricia frowned slightly. Monica continued calmly. If behavior like this only gets corrected privately, it survives publicly. Nobody spoke, because every person standing there understood exactly what she meant. Monica stepped closer to the windows overlooking the runway. Outside, dawn was finally breaking over the tarmac. Orange lights stretched across parked aircraft. Fuel trucks moved slowly below. Ground crews crossed beneath flashing beacons. The airport looked peaceful from far away. But Monica knew institutions could look polished while carrying rot underneath. That was true in aviation, in hospitals, in schools, everywhere. Behind her, Susan's voice came smaller now. I said I was wrong. Monica turned slowly. No, she replied. You said things got out of control. Susan opened her mouth, stopped. Because Monica was right again, there had not been a real apology yet. Only panic. Only consequences.
Only fear.
Monica's voice softened slightly. A real apology begins before someone loses power. Susan's eyes filled immediately. This time she looked less defensive, more tired, more exposed. Like a woman realizing she had spent years confusing authority with superiority. Patricia suddenly stepped away to answer another incoming call. His monitor refreshed automatically. His eyes widened. Oh my God. Jordan looked over. The video had crossed 3 million views, and underneath it, thousands of comments were pouring in from pilots across the country. Female pilots, black pilots, veterans, flight attendants. Story after story. Gate confrontations, questioned credentials, passengers assuming they were not qualified. Jordan stared at the screen quietly. It wasn't just her, he murmured. Monica heard him. Of course she did. That was the moment the full weight of the morning settled over her. This had never been only about one badge at one gate. The country had been waiting for someone to finally leave the camera running long enough for people to see the pattern clearly. By 8:30 in the morning, Skylink Airways had stopped pretending the situation was temporary. 3 additional corporate officers arrived at Gate C-14 within 20 minutes. Dark suits, company badges, tight faces. Passengers noticed immediately. Airports teach people how to recognize hierarchy without words. The faster someone walks, the quieter the people around them become. A man named Richard Sloan stepped out first, Senior Vice President of Corporate Operations, 61 years old, former Air Force logistics officer, reputation for solving problems before shareholders ever heard about them. The moment Richard saw Monica Hayes standing beside the frozen gate, his expression changed. Not surprise.
Concern.
Real concern. He walked directly toward her without acknowledging anyone else first. Captain Hayes. Monica nodded once. Richard. Susan watched the interaction carefully from her chair. That single exchange destroyed the last illusion she still had. These people did not see Monica as an employee caught in controversy. They saw her as someone important enough to protect. Richard lowered his voice. I just came from emergency leadership briefing. Monica crossed her arms lightly.
And?
Richard exhaled. The board is panicking. Jordan looked down immediately. Tyler pretended not to hear, but everybody heard. Board. That word traveled through the gate like electricity. Richard continued quietly. The video crossed 8 million views in less than 3 hours. National outlets picked it up. Congressional aviation staffers are already requesting statements. Patricia closed her eyes briefly. Susan's breathing became shallow again. Richard glanced toward the passengers, still recording everything. Then back at Monica. We need to move this somewhere private. Monica's answer came instantly. No. Richard rubbed his jaw. Monica? No, she repeated calmly. This happened publicly. The response stays public. Richard studied her for a long moment. He understood exactly what she meant. If leadership disappeared her into a conference room now, the story would become another controlled corporate narrative. Miscommunication, unfortunate incident, internal review pending, clean language, dead language. Monica refused to let dignity disappear behind legal vocabulary. Across the seating area, Evelyn watched Richard carefully. She had spent decades dealing with school boards and administrators who only became urgent after cameras arrived. She recognized the posture immediately. Damage control, not accountability. Richard turned slightly towards Susan. His face hardened. Did you physically remove Captain Hayes' credentials? Susan swallowed. Yes, but that's not a yes but question. His voice stayed calm, which made it worse. Susan looked stunned. People like Susan spent years learning how to navigate authority through confidence and familiarity. But when real institutional power entered the room, Confidence collapsed fast. I believe there was a security concern, she said weakly. Richard nodded slowly. And what specifically made you believe that? Susan froze. There it was. The question she had avoided all morning. Specificity. Not feelings. Not assumptions. Not impressions. Facts. Passengers leaned forward quietly. Tyler stopped typing again. Even the terminal noise seemed farther away. Susan searched desperately for language that sounded reasonable. She wasn't listed in the pre-boarding update. Jordan immediately frowned. That's not true. Susan looked toward him sharply. Jordan stepped forward. Operations switched captains at 4:55 this morning after Captain Lanning reported chest pain. Richard turned toward Patricia. Patricia nodded immediately. She was updated in the system. Richard looked back at Susan. Then why did you continue challenging Captain Hayes after confirmation? Susan opened her mouth. Nothing came out because everybody standing there already knew the real answer. And for the first time that morning, Susan realized something terrifying. Silence sounds different when people stop helping you maintain the lie. Richard glanced toward Monica again. What do you want? The question shifted the entire atmosphere. Not what do you need, not what can we offer. What do you want? Because everyone now understood Monica held leverage. Real leverage. Monica took her time answering. Outside the terminal windows, a baggage cart rolled beneath the sunrise. Aircraft lights blinked across the tarmac. Ground crews moved through cold morning air, while the entire airport continued operating around one frozen gate. That contrast hit Monica hard. Systems always keep moving, even while people break inside them. Finally, she spoke. I want a full crew climate investigation. Patricia inhaled sharply. Richard's expression tightened. Susan stared at Monica in disbelief.
A what?
Monica looked directly at her. I want every discrimination complaint and connected to flight operations reviewed for the last 10 years. The gate went dead silent. Jordan slowly straightened, because now he understood where this was going. Not revenge, exposure. Richard lowered his voice immediately. That level of review would involve federal oversight. Yes, Monica replied. It could affect licensing reviews. Yes. It could expose the company to lawsuits. Monica held his gaze. Then maybe the company should have cared sooner. Richard looked away first. Near the seating area, Ethan whispered under his breath. Wow. His father nodded slowly, because older Americans understood something younger people sometimes missed. Real change usually begins when someone important finally refuses to absorb humiliation quietly. Susan suddenly stood up. This is insane, she snapped. You're trying to destroy the airline over one misunderstanding. Monica turned toward her calmly. No, she said. I'm trying to stop the next one. Susan's face twisted.
You think I'm racist?
Monica did not answer immediately. That frightened Susan more than accusation would have. Finally, Monica spoke. I think you stopped seeing individuals. Susan blinked rapidly. And once people become categories in your mind, Monica continued, respect becomes conditional. The words landed slowly, deeply. Evelyn lowered her eyes. Officer Ramirez shifted uncomfortably. Tyler stared at his keyboard again because suddenly he was remembering every moment in his own life when he stayed quiet because speaking up felt inconvenient. Monica's voice softened slightly. That doesn't start with hate most of the time. Susan looked confused now. Monica continued. It starts with comfort, familiarity. Assumptions repeated so often they stopped sounding dangerous. Richard watched her carefully. This was why Monica terrified executives when she chose to speak publicly. She was impossible to dismiss as emotional. Everything she said sounded measured, experienced, provable. That made institutions vulnerable. Patricia's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it and cursed quietly under her breath. Richard looked over.
What now?
She turned the screen toward him. A major cable network had already posted the video. The headline read, Airline captain publicly challenged at gate despite FAA credentials. Below it, another headline was spreading even faster. Former employees described pattern of complaints at Skylink Airways. Richard's face went pale. Former employees? Patricia nodded slowly. They're coming forward. Jordan leaned back against the counter heavily. There it was, the crack in the wall. Once one story survives public scrutiny, others start finding oxygen. Susan looked physically ill now.
This can't be happening.
Evelyn studied her quietly. Oh, it's been happening for a long time, she said softly. People are just finally listening. Monica walked toward the windows again. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she spoke quietly enough that only those closest heard. When I was 12 years old, she said, my father took me to an air show in Alabama. Jordan looked toward her. He pointed at the pilots and told me something I never forgot. Her reflection stared back from the terminal glass. He said some people will spend their whole lives trying to decide who belongs in the sky. The gate stayed silent. Monica's voice lowered further. Then he told me something else. She turned slowly back toward the room. Never let small minds define the size of your future. Even Richard Sloan looked affected by that. Because suddenly this was no longer about aviation policy. It was about inheritance, the inheritance of dignity, of limitation, of courage. Susan sank slowly back into her chair. And for the first time all morning, she stopped trying to defend herself. Not because she had fully changed, but because somewhere inside her, she was finally beginning to see the distance between procedure and prejudice. And that realization hurt more than public shame ever could. At 9:15 in the morning, the first former employee arrived at Gate C14 in person. Nobody expected that. A woman in a dark green coat stepped off the escalator, carrying a leather folder against her chest. Mid-60s, gray curls tucked beneath a knitted cap, walking with the careful stiffness of someone recovering from surgery. Patricia recognized her immediately.
Oh my God.
She whispered. Richard Sloan turned sharply. You know her? Patricia nodded slowly. Donna Mercer. Jordan frowned.
The former training supervisor?
Patricia swallowed. Donna had worked for Skylink Airways for almost 30 years before retiring quietly 5 years earlier. She trained hundreds of flight attendants. Pilots respected her because she treated hierarchy seriously, but humanity even more seriously. People used to say Donna could spot a dangerous crew dynamic before the aircraft even left the gate. Donna stopped a few feet from Monica. Then she looked toward Susan, and the expression on her face carried something worse than anger. Disappointment. Deep disappointment. Susan stared at her in disbelief. Donna? Donna nodded once. You remember me now. Susan's mouth opened slightly, because suddenly the past was walking toward her in public. Richard stepped forward carefully. Ms. Mercer, this is an active internal matter. No, Donna interrupted quietly. It became public the moment a captain had her badge ripped off in front of passengers. Richard fell silent immediately. Donna turned toward Monica. I watched the video 3 times before coming down here. Monica studied her carefully. Donna looked tired, not weak, just tired in the way people become after spending decades watching institutions protect comfort over truth. You handled yourself with dignity, Donna said softly. Monica nodded once. Thank you. Donna glanced around the gate, at the phones, at the executives, at Susan. Then she took a slow breath. I filed complaints about behavior like this 12 years ago. The entire gate froze. Susan's face drained instantly. Patricia whispered under her breath, Jesus. Donna continued calmly.
Not against one person.
Against a pattern. Richard's jaw tightened. Jordan folded his arms. Monica remained perfectly still. Donna opened the leather folder in her hands. Inside were old documents, printed reports, emails, training evaluations, paper, real paper, the kind nobody expected retired employees to keep. I warned leadership that certain gate and cabin crews were developing exclusion habits. Donna's voice stayed level, questioning minority pilots more aggressively, challenging credentials selectively, assuming authority based on appearance. Susan looked sick now. That's not true. Donna looked directly at her. Yes, she replied quietly. It is. The silence afterward was brutal, because Donna Mercer did not sound emotional. She sounded prepared. That frightened Richard Sloan more than anything else that morning. He stepped closer immediately. Donna, we addressed those concerns internally at the time. Donna gave him a long look. No, Richard, you archived them. That sentence cut through the terminal like broken glass. Passengers leaned closer, phones lifted higher. Tyler could barely breathe now, because the story was evolving in real time. This was no longer one incident. This was institutional memory. Evelyn Price closed her eyes briefly. She had lived long enough to recognize the pattern too. People call something isolated until enough victims stand next to each other. Susan shook her head rapidly. You're making this sound deliberate. Donna looked at her sadly. That's because you still think off only counts if it comes with hatred. Nobody moved. Donna stepped closer. I trained crews for 3 decades, she said. Most discrimination doesn't arrive screaming. It arrives smiling, confident, certain it's being reasonable. Susan's eyes filled instantly. Because somewhere inside herself, she knew Donna was describing her perfectly. Monica finally spoke. How many reports? Donna looked toward her. 32 formal complaints over 14 years involving flight crew bias concerns. Richard closed his eyes briefly. Patricia turned pale. Jordan muttered, "Oh my God." Donna nodded slowly. And those are only the ones people felt safe enough to file. That landed hardest of all. The hidden number. The quiet number. The people who stay silent because survival felt safer than honesty. Monica looked down for a moment. Not out of weakness. Out of recognition. Because she knew exactly how many talented people left industries quietly after deciding dignity cost too much. Tyler suddenly removed his headset completely. Nobody noticed at first. But he was shaking slightly. Patricia looked over. Tyler? He swallowed hard. There was another captain. The room turned toward him. Tyler looked terrified now, like someone standing at the edge of a decision. She flew through here last year, he said softly. Black woman, senior pilot. Monica watched him carefully. Tyler continued. Passengers questioned whether she belonged in first class while she was deadheading. Richard's face hardened.
Was it reported?
Tyler nodded weakly. I overheard gate staff joking about it afterward. Patricia whispered, "Why didn't you say anything?" Tyler's eyes dropped. Because everybody laughed. No one answered. Because that was how culture survived. Not through monsters. Through audiences. Jordan leaned heavily against the counter now. He suddenly felt exhausted. Not by the scandal. By the realization that good people around him had normalized small humiliations for years because confronting them felt socially uncomfortable. Monica looked toward Tyler. You're saying something now. Tyler nodded slowly.
Yeah.
Monica's voice softened slightly. That matters. Tyler looked like he might cry from relief hearing that. Not because he was innocent. Because somebody still believed people could choose differently once they understood better. Richard's phone rang again. This time he answered immediately.
Yes, sir.
His expressions changed within seconds, then changed again. Worse. When he lowered the phone, his face looked 10 years older.
What happened?
Patricia asked quietly. Richard stared toward Monica. The Department of Transportation requested formal cooperation. Jordan muttered a curse under his breath. Patricia looked stunned. Federal transportation oversight entering publicly meant investigations could spread far beyond one airline. Susan sat completely motionless now, like her body no longer knew how to respond. Richard rubbed both hands over his face. They're asking whether leadership ignored prior warning signs. Donna gave a small, humorless laugh. Well, she said quietly, that shouldn't take long to answer. No one challenged her, because no one could. Near the windows, Ethan looked overwhelmed now. He glanced toward his father. This is huge. His father nodded slowly. Son, he murmured, most big things start with small things people tolerated too long. Monica heard that, and for a second, her father's voice returned to her again. Never let small minds define the size of your future. The words had carried her through military academies, empty hotel rooms, brutal evaluations, and quiet loneliness. But standing here now, Monica realized something else. Her father had not only been teaching survival, he had been teaching responsibility. Because when someone finally reaches power after years of exclusion, silence becomes its own kind of betrayal. Susan suddenly looked toward Monica again, this time differently, not defensively, almost desperately. I didn't know, she whispered. Monica studied her carefully. No, she replied softly. You didn't want to know. Susan lowered her eyes immediately. And that was the first truly honest moment she had all morning. Not because she fully understood the damage yet, but because denial was finally cracking open under the weight of witnesses, history, and truth. Donna closed her folder slowly. Then she looked around the terminal, at the cameras, at the executives, at the passengers still seated long after they could have walked away. You know what scares institutions most? She asked quietly. Nobody answered. Donna looked directly at Richard Sloan, patterns with proof. The terminal went silent again. Outside, another aircraft lifted into the morning sky, clean, controlled, powerful. Inside Gate C-14, the people standing beneath it were finally beginning to understand something much heavier. The real danger had never been one angry employee. It was how many people had quietly learned to look away together. By 10 in the morning, the airport no longer felt like an airport. It felt like a courtroom without walls. Passengers who had missed connections stayed anyway. Airline employees from nearby gates drifted closer, pretending to check schedules while secretly listening. Airport police stood farther back now, not intervening, only observing. Everyone sensed the same thing. Something irreversible had started. The giant departure screen above Gate C-14 still flashed delayed in red letters. But nobody was asking about departure times anymore. They were asking questions much bigger than a flight. Richard Sloan stood near the windows, speaking quietly into another phone call. His voice had become tighter with each hour.
Yes.
Pause. I understand the exposure. Another pause. No, sir. I don't believe containment is possible anymore. Containment. Jordan heard that word and looked away. That was always the first instinct of institutions under pressure. Contain the story, contain the damage, contain the truth. But truth did not stay contained once ordinary people recognized themselves inside it. Monica sat alone near the end of the gate now, finally silent after hours of statements and interviews. Her tablet rested closed across her lap. For the first time all morning, exhaustion showed on her face. Not dramatic exhaustion, the quiet kind, the kind older people recognized immediately. The cost of holding yourself together while the world tests your dignity in public. Evelyn slowly approached and lowered herself carefully into the seat beside her. For a moment, neither woman spoke. The airport hummed around them, rolling luggage, distant announcements, coffee grinders, jet engines vibrating faintly through the terminal glass. Finally, Evelyn looked at Monica. You remind me of my brother. Monica turned slightly. He integrated a high school in Mississippi back in 1968. Evelyn said softly. Everybody remembers the yelling, but what I remember most is how tired he looked afterward. Monica listened quietly. Evelyn smiled sadly. He told me something once. She paused. People think courage feels powerful. Most days it just feels lonely. That landed deep, because Monica knew exactly what she meant. Jordan watched them from across the gate. Two women from different generations, different lives, connected by the same exhaustion. Tyler suddenly rushed toward Patricia, holding printed papers in trembling hands.
You need to see this.
Patricia took the documents quickly, then froze. Richard noticed immediately.
What now?
Patricia looked stunned. These are archived employee complaints. Donna Mercer stepped closer. Where did you find those? Tyler swallowed hard. In the old compliance database, somebody flagged similar incidents years ago. Patricia flipped through the pages, one complaint after another, questioned credentials, unequal treatment, humiliating gate interactions, selective security concerns, different names, same pattern. Richard's face hardened with every page. How many? Tyler's voice nearly cracked. 47. The gate fell silent again. Susan looked physically ill now, because the ground beneath her defense was disappearing piece by piece. This was no longer about one bad decision. It was culture, documented culture. Donna closed her eyes slowly. They buried all of it. Richard snapped defensively. We investigated. No, Donna interrupted sharply. You managed risk. That's not the same thing. The word struck hard because everyone present understood the difference. Risk management protects institutions. Accountability protects people. Monica slowly stood from her chair. The movement alone quieted the room, not because she demanded attention, because by now people trusted the weight of her silence. She walked toward the stack of complaints in Patricia's hands, did not touch them, only looked. Then she asked one question. How many employees left after filing reports? Nobody answered immediately. Patricia flipped through pages quickly. Her expression changed. Oh, God. Richard looked at her.
What?
Patricia's voice dropped. Several resigned within a year. Jordan rubbed his forehead hard. Tyler looked sick, because suddenly another truth appeared beneath the scandal. The people harmed most severely were not always the ones humiliated publicly. Sometimes they were the ones who disappeared quietly afterward. Monica stared at the papers for a long moment. Then she looked toward the crowded terminal around them. You know what scares people away from reporting things? She asked quietly. Nobody moved. Not conflict, Monica answered herself softly. Futility. The word settled heavily across the gate. Passengers listened. Employees listened. Even airport police listened. Monica continued. Most people can survive difficulty. What breaks them is believing nothing changes afterward. Susan lowered her head, because somewhere inside herself, she finally understood the scale of what she had participated in. Not created alone, participated in. A system where humiliation became routine enough that leadership stopped hearing it. Richard suddenly looked older than he had that morning. This airline employs over 30,000 people, he said quietly. You're talking about a systemic failure. Monica met his eyes evenly. No, she replied. I'm talking about a human failure repeated systematically. That sentence stopped him cold. Near the charging station, Ethan whispered to his father again. She talks different than politicians. His father nodded slowly. Because she's not protecting herself while she speaks. That was true. Monica never sounded rehearsed. She sounded experienced. And Americans over 60 recognized that difference instantly. Experience speaks slower, cleaner, harder. Patricia's phone vibrated again. This time she stared at the screen before answering. What is it? Jordan asked. Patricia looked pale. The FAA wants Monica in Washington. The entire gate froze. Richard blinked. For what? Patricia swallowed. A preliminary congressional transportation briefing. Even Monica looked surprised by that. Not outwardly. But Jordan saw the tiny shift in her eyes. This had moved beyond corporate investigation now, into national conversation. Susan whispered under her breath. Congress? Like the word itself felt impossible. Donna looked at Monica carefully. They're going to ask whether this reflects broader aviation culture. Monica nodded slowly. Because it does. No hesitation. No corporate language.
Just truth.
Richard exhaled sharply. You understand what this could become? Monica turned toward him. I think the better question is why it took a public humiliation for anyone to care. Richard had no answer. Because he knew she was right. The gate remained painfully quiet. Then Officer Ramirez stepped forward unexpectedly. Everyone turned toward him. He looked nervous, uncomfortable, but determined. I want to add something to the report. Patricia frowned slightly.
What?
Ramirez looked toward Monica first, then toward Susan. When I first arrived, he said slowly, I assumed Captain Hayes was probably the disruptive passenger. Silence. Pure silence. Ramirez swallowed hard. I saw a black woman standing near security officers while an older white employee looked upset. He lowered his eyes briefly, and my brain filled in the story before facts did. Susan stared at him. Passengers stared at him. Ramirez continued quietly. I corrected myself once I saw credentials, but that first assumption still happened. Monica watched him carefully. And you're admitting it publicly, she said. Ramirez nodded once. Yes, Mom. Monica's expression softened slightly. That matters too. The officer looked visibly relieved hearing that. Because accountability offered honestly creates something different than exposure forced through shame. Evelyn smiled faintly from her chair. There it is, she murmured again. The beginning. Outside the terminal windows, another aircraft rose into the bright Georgia sky. Clean white body cutting through sunlight. Passengers inside sipping coffee, reading newspapers, living ordinary mornings. Most of them had no idea a single gate inside one airport was forcing an entire industry to look at itself honestly for the first time in years. And standing at the center of it all was a woman who never asked to become a symbol. She only refused to become invisible. 3 weeks later, Monica Hayes walked into a federal hearing room in Washington wearing the same captain's wings Susan Whitmore had ripped from her uniform. The room was colder than the airport, colder in tone too. Dark wood walls, television cameras, rows of reporters, government staffers whispering over folders thick with printed evidence. Outside the chamber, protesters and airline employees crowded the sidewalks holding signs about accountability, dignity, and workplace discrimination. Inside, nobody smiled. Monica sat alone at the witness table. No legal theatrics, no dramatic entrance. Just a black woman in a Navy airline uniform sitting beneath bright government lights, while the entire country waited to hear whether the aviation industry had been lying to itself for years. Richard Sloan sat farther behind with corporate counsel. He looked exhausted now, not polished, not commanding, exhausted. Skylink stock had dropped 12% since the incident. Internal investigations had spread across 6 hubs. Former employees kept coming forward publicly, and every new interview sounded painfully familiar. Questioned authority, unequal scrutiny, selective professionalism. The hearing chairman adjusted his glasses. "Captain Hayes," he began.
Thank you for appearing voluntarily today.
Monica nodded once. "Thank you for inviting me." The chairman studied the papers in front of him. "You understand this hearing concerns broader allegations regarding discriminatory conduct and institutional response failures within commercial aviation?" "Yes, sir." The room fell quiet. The chairman leaned forward slightly. "Captain Hayes, can you describe what happened at Gate C-14 in Atlanta?" Monica did not rush. She never rushed. "That morning," she said calmly, "I arrived for reassignment duty after another captain reported a medical issue. My credentials were active. My assignment was confirmed in system records. Yet before I could board my own aircraft, I was publicly treated as suspicious, despite multiple verifications." The hearing room remained silent except for camera shutters. Monica continued. "My badge was physically removed from my uniform. Security was called. Passengers were instructed to avoid me as though I represented danger. Several senators shifted uncomfortably, not because the facts were shocking anymore, because hearing them spoken plainly made the humiliation impossible to soften. A female senator from Illinois leaned toward her microphone. "Captain Hayes, at what point did you believe this incident reflected something larger than an individual misunderstanding?" Monica looked directly at her. When other pilots started telling the same story, the senator nodded slowly. Monica folded her hands carefully on the table. "That was the moment I understood this was not about one gate agent or one flight attendant. It was about pattern recognition inside institutional culture." A reporter in the second row stopped typing for a second just to look at her, because Monica did not sound rehearsed. She sounded exact. That frightened institutions more than outrage. The chairman cleared his throat. "You are currently director of flight safety for Skylink Airways. Is that correct?"
Yes, sir.
"And prior to this incident, had you personally received complaints involving discriminatory treatment of crew?" Monica paused, not because she lacked answers, because she understood the weight of speaking them publicly. "Yes," she said quietly. The room shifted immediately. "How many?" "Enough that I stopped believing they were isolated." Pens moved rapidly now. Camera lights brightened. Richard Sloan lowered his eyes. A senator from Texas leaned forward sharply. "Captain Hayes, are you suggesting airline leadership knowingly ignored discrimination?" Monica answered carefully. "I'm suggesting many institutions become better at managing complaints than solving the conditions creating them." The room went still again. Even older senators who disagreed politically recognized the truth in that sentence. Because every American over 60 had lived long enough to watch organizations protect image before people. The senator frowned. "That sounds like a very serious accusation." Monica held his gaze evenly. "It's a serious pattern. No emotion, no anger, just truth." That made it impossible to dismiss her as unstable or vindictive. In the back row, Donna Mercer sat quietly beside Evelyn Price. Both women watched Monica with the same expression, pride mixed with grief, because they knew how much it costs to remain composed while speaking painful truths publicly. The chairman looked down at another report. "Captain Hayes, after the incident, you requested a 10-year review of crew discrimination complaints. Why?" Monica's answer came immediately, "Because cultures do not appear overnight." The chairman nodded slowly. Monica continued. "If employees repeatedly report the same experience across years and locations, then the issue is no longer personal conflict. It becomes institutional behavior." A younger senator interrupted carefully. "But many Americans watching this may ask whether people are becoming too quick to assume discrimination." Monica turned toward him fully. "That concern deserves honest discussion," she replied. The room quieted again. Monica's voice remained calm. "But I think Americans also deserve honesty about another reality." She paused briefly. "Authority is repeatedly questioned Only after certain faces walk into the room, eventually patterns become visible. The younger senator leaned back slowly, not defeated, thinking that mattered more. Outside the chamber, protesters continued chanting faintly beyond thick government windows. Inside, Monica Hayes kept speaking with the same steady rhythm that had frozen Gate C-14 weeks earlier. No performance, no slogan, just lived experience translated into careful language. Then the chairman asked the question everyone had been circling around. Captain Hayes, what do you believe should happen now? The hearing became perfectly silent. Monica looked down briefly at her captain's wings. The same wings Susan Whitmore had once held in her hand like they did not belong there. Then Monica lifted her eyes again. I think accountability has to become more uncomfortable than silence. Several reporters stopped writing completely. Monica continued softly. Right now, many professionals stay quiet because speaking costs more than enduring. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. Donna lowered her head, because they both knew how true that was. Monica folded her hands again. If people fear retaliation, humiliation, career damage, or isolation after reporting discrimination, then institutions create silence by design whether they intend to or not. Richard Sloan looked physically wounded hearing that, because deep down he knew the system had rewarded containment for years. The chairman leaned forward carefully. And what would meaningful accountability look like to you? Monica answered without hesitation. Transparency. One word. Strong enough to fill the chamber. Not polished statements. Not hidden settlements. Not mandatory training videos no one believes in. A few quiet laughs escaped the back rows. Monica did not smile. Real transparency means admitting where cultures fail before another employee is forced to carry humiliation alone. A long silence followed. Heavy silence. The kind that settles when people realize they are hearing something true enough to outlive the news cycle. Finally, the chairman removed his glasses, slowly. Captain Hayes, he said quietly, you understand your testimony today will have national impact. Monica nodded once.
Yes, sir.
He studied her carefully. Are you prepared for that? For the first time all morning, Monica looked tired again. Not weak, human. I don't think anyone's fully prepared to become evidence, she said softly. The room fell completely still. Even the cameras seemed quieter somehow, because that sentence carried the weight of every person who never wanted attention. Only dignity. Monica took one slow breath. Then she added something no one in that chamber expected. I don't want people watching this hearing to hate Susan Whitmore. Several heads lifted immediately. Richard looked stunned. Even Donna blinked. Monica continued calmly. I want them to examine the habits that allowed her assumptions to feel normal. No applause came. This was not that kind of room. But something deeper moved through it. Recognition. The understanding that real leadership does not only expose failure, it asks people to confront themselves honestly too. And sitting beneath the harsh lights of a federal hearing chamber, Monica Hayes did something the airline industry had avoided for years. She forced the country to stop looking away. 6 months later, Monica Hayes walked through Atlanta International Airport again before sunrise. The terminal smelled the same. Coffee, jet fuel, floor polish, cold morning air drifting through automatic doors. But people looked at her differently now, not because she wanted attention, because the country had learned her face. Passengers recognized her quietly as she crossed the concourse in her Navy captain's uniform. Some nodded respectfully, some whispered. A few older travelers stood straighter when they realized who had just passed them. Monica acknowledged none of it outwardly. She kept walking, steady pace, straight back, calm eyes. The same way she walked the morning everything changed. Only now, nobody questioned whether she belonged. Near gate C-14, Tyler Reynolds stood behind the counter, adjusting his tie nervously. He had been promoted 3 months earlier after testifying during the federal review. He noticed Monica first. For half a second, panic crossed his face like he was reliving that terrible morning all over again. Then Monica smiled slightly. Small, real. Tyler relaxed immediately. Good morning, Captain Hayes. Morning, Tyler. His voice sounded stronger now, more grounded. Not because life became easier after the scandal, because honesty had changed him. Tyler no longer laughed quietly when coworkers made comments about passengers who looked out of place. He no longer ignored moments that felt wrong because speaking up seemed uncomfortable. People around him noticed. Cultures always notice when silence changes. Across the terminal, a young black girl about 11 years old stared wide-eyed at Monica's uniform while holding her mother's hand. The girl whispered something. Her mother smiled softly and nodded toward Monica. The child slowly walked closer, excited, nervous. "Captain Hayes?" Monica turned gently. The girl held a paperback aviation book tightly against her chest. "I saw you on television." Monica crouched slightly to meet her eye level. "What's your name, Naomi?" "You like airplanes, Naomi?" The girl nodded immediately. "I want to fly someday." Monica smiled again, this time warmer. "Then fly." Simple words. But Naomi's entire face lit up. Her mother looked emotional suddenly. "You have no idea what seeing you meant to her," she said quietly. Monica stood slowly. "Yes," she replied softly, "I probably do. That was the real aftermath nobody discussed enough. Not the headlines, not the hearings, not the stock losses. The children watching. The people who quietly changed what they believed was possible after seeing someone refuse to disappear." Near the windows overlooking the runway, Richard Sloan sat alone with a cup of untouched coffee. He looked older now, not destroyed, changed. The congressional hearings had triggered massive restructuring inside Skylink Airways. Internal complaint systems were rebuilt. Independent oversight panels formed. Anonymous reporting protections expanded nationwide. Several executives retired early. Others resigned. Susan Whitmore was no longer employed by the airline. Richard watched Monica approach slowly.
"Morning.
He said quietly.
Morning."
For a moment, they simply watched aircraft taxi through pale morning fog. Finally, Richard spoke.
"You were right."
Monica did not answer immediately. Richard gave a tired laugh. "I spent 30 years believing stability mattered most." He looked down at the coffee in his hands. "Turns out silence can look stable for a very long time." Monica nodded slowly. "That's the danger of unresolved things." Richard looked toward her carefully. "I should listen sooner." That sentence carried weight because it came without defense attached to it. No excuses, no explanations, just truth. Monica studied the runway lights blinking through the dawn. "We all inherit systems," she said quietly. "The question is whether we become brave enough to examine them honestly." Richard lowered his eyes because he finally understood something painful. Good institutions do not fail only because bad people exist inside them. They fail when decent people grow too comfortable with small injustices. A boarding announcement echoed overhead. Passengers gathered near the gate slowly. Among them stood Officer Ramirez in plain clothes now, off duty, carrying a backpack over one shoulder. He noticed Monica and walked over immediately. "Captain Hayes." She nodded.
"How have you been?"
Ramirez smiled awkwardly. "Different." Monica understood exactly what he meant. The officer rubbed the back of his neck. "My department started bias review workshops after the hearings." He shook his head slightly. "First time I ever really thought about how fast assumptions happen." Monica looked at him carefully. "The important part is slowing down enough to question them." Ramirez nodded. "That's harder than people think." "Yes," Monica replied softly. "It is. Because that was the deeper truth underneath everything. Prejudice rarely announces itself dramatically. Most of the time it arrives disguised as instinct, efficiency, professional judgment, common sense. That is why it survived so long." Across the gate area, Evelyn Price appeared slowly with her cane and canvas tote. Monica's face softened instantly. Evelyn smiled. "You still walking through airports causing trouble?" Monica laughed quietly for the first time all morning. Apparently, Evelyn reached out and squeezed her hand gently. "You know what I'm happiest about?" Monica tilted her head slightly. "You stayed human through all of it." That sentence stayed between them, because many people become hardened after public humiliation. Bitter, sharp, closed. Monica had not. She still listened carefully, still spoke softly, still treated strangers with dignity. Power had not changed her. Pressure revealed her. Near boarding, Naomi and her mother were still watching Monica from a distance. The little girl suddenly raised her hand in a shy wave. Monica waved back. And somewhere deep inside Naomi's imagination, the sky changed shape forever. The final federal report released 2 weeks later described the Gate C-14 incident as a preventable failure of institutional culture, oversight, and professional accountability. News channels covered it for days. Then slowly the country moved on. That is what countries do. But not everyone moved on unchanged. Flight schools reported increased enrollment among women and minority applicants. Airlines revised credential verification procedures nationwide. Anonymous reporting protections expanded across aviation officials departments. Most importantly, people started interrupting things sooner. Small comments, quiet assumptions, public disrespect disguised as procedure. Not perfectly, but more often, and sometimes that is how real change begins. Not all at once, one interruption at a time. As boarding finally started that morning, Monica adjusted the captain's wings on her uniform one last time. The same wings someone once tried to tear away from her. Now they carried something heavier than authority. They carried memory. The memory of what happens when dignity refuses to step aside quietly. Monica picked up her flight bag and walked toward the jet bridge. Passengers stepped aside respectfully as she passed, not because she demanded it, because she earned it. And somewhere behind her, Naomi Carter stood taller, watching that uniform disappear into the aircraft doorway. Like she had just seen her own future board the plane first. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave 3 words in the comments. Never stay silent.